So the main like focus is on this question 17.
Right.
Right, like that's
person to like get more Starbucks.
Okay, so you have very little incentive at this point to.
Be the best worker I could be.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And when are you leaving?
Like the end of the semester.
Oh, so you got time.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do after that, or you don't know?
I was gonna apply for an on-campus.
Well, that would be pretty sweet and easy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the credit union's hiring on campus.
I was gonna like apply for IT.
Oh yeah, you could totally do that. Which, by the way, there used to be a guy in IT named Pierce. My son's named Pierce. I saw the guy on the last day he worked here, but I think his job was open. Yeah. What did they do when a Starbucks employee leaves? Is there any kind of routine they do? Like everyone throws a cup in the air? Or?
That's what they might be, I guess. Yeah, because I don't know.
Oh,
There's
no.
a lot of drama.
Is what?
Lots of drama at Starbucks.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Do you know anything about conference coming up?
Which conference? Is there a conference here on campus? Who's here? Tell us. We were just talking about Starbucks, but now we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
I've also got something for you. It's my Starbucks day today. I've got two. You missed my whole discussion though about shirts, t-shirts, and whatnot. What size shirt do you wear? It's not creepy. It's not a creepy.
Small, maybe?
See, fantastic. Again, you're missing part of the conversation. It sounds creepier now, but it doesn't sound creepy in the context of everything else.
You sure about that?
No, well, no, not really, actually, no. But I keep telling myself it's not. No, you missed it. It was a presentation of the first shirt, which was from a thrift shop, which celebrates someone having a haunted house that was so fantastic. They made shirts to celebrate their haunted house. I got to give it to you already. This is again, not being creepy. You don't have to wear it. You can make a voodoo doll to celebrate your dislike of me by having a stuffed. I think the way you do it is, can you put it in a stuffed animal and then like stab the stuffed animal? Is that how voodoo dolls work? Or just stuff this? Look it up. I'm sure someone's made something. Now yours, I picked the same color theme for the two Starbucks employees. This one is fantastic. This guy got off from committing some crime, and it was Jason got off bar tour. So they did a bar tour after this guy got off from committing some crime. It's got listed on the back all the bars they went to. Someone signed it as well. Yeah. Yeah, so
I'm into it.
there we go. See, that's all I need to hear. Again, you don't have to wear it. You can again put it in a boot up. What's the conference? Do we know what the
Right,
conference
that's
is?
working.
Is it conference on campus or
Right.
is it the name of the bar?
The bar.
Or it could be the people that went on the bar tour. I actually don't know. Those look like names or bars?
Those look like bars.
Bar names are pretty interesting.
They're really committed.
Cafe 210 is one of them, so I don't think it's a person.
Yeah, and this is on the mainland. Same with
Oh,
that.
that's so funny. 210 is very good for San Antonio.
Is for what? For what area?
San Antonio, where I'm from, Texas.
Hey, you would think that I was following this thing, yeah. This is fantastic.
You're also making it creepier.
Yeah, exactly. So see, that's right, San Antonio. That's right. We had that discussion with the mayor with the big handlebar mustache and we don't know the
I
conversation.
can't find it now. Basically, so it's going to be a bunch of different workshops. So some of the student leaders on campus going to a conference in Hawaii. And so we're supposed to take what we learned from there, from those workshops, and then like duplicate them back here. So more than welcome to sign up for it. And just, so if you're interested in that,
Is
it's free.
when is it? What day is it? Do we know?
It's the 15th of March, I believe.
Kristen and Levi, I'm eyeing your shirt size next here. You're right. That does sound. Scheiding. Okay. I'm gonna stop while I'm ahead. I wouldn't even say I'm ahead. Okay, let's just jump into production. So the point of, let's get rid of this here and make this smaller. I don't know how to move that. How do I move this? I don't want anyone to. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what we did, the big thing that we did last week, or the previous 2 weeks, was we were talking about the nature of the consumer, trying to figure out why the consumer does what, well, actually past 3 weeks, why the consumer does what they do and how they meet their objective being allocation of scarce income in an attempt to maximize their utility. So now we want to have the exact same discussion, except now we want to do it with the firm. And how does the firm allocate its inputs to make its output? So right before class, I had a 2-hour-long conversation with a former graduate of mine who now works for Subaru on the mainland. So he works at their headquarters, and they've got the exact same issue where they have, it's interesting, they actually have they have 2 assembly plants worldwide. One is in Japan, other is in Indiana. What he is tasked with right now is trying to figure out that when they launch a new car model or they refresh the brand of the car, they need to anticipate how many people are going to buy the cars for 2 years before they actually introduce the car, because they need to tell their parts suppliers, dude, this is how many parts we need so that we can make all the cars that we have to make. A pretty easily understandable problem that they have, which all aligns exactly with this. I don't want to bore you with how they actually do it, but what they use is some Monte Carlo simulations to try to predict, based on previous car models they've introduced, so how many parts they're going to need, how many assembly line hours they're going to need, how much assembly line plant time they're going to need. So this is basically the same underlying structure for how actual production does occur. So this isn't, it's a bit simplified, but it's not too divorced from how actual firms are doing this. So Subaru, that has 8 different products that they're producing, basically how they figure out how many workers they need, how many parts they need to make the output. And that's really how this works here, is that, let's talk about first, why do companies exist at all? Right, because in some sense, they might not need to exist if we just told people, right, why do I teach at a university rather than just teach out of my home? Right, because I mean, I'm sure there are professors that do teach out of their home, right? They sell YouTube lectures or something. But their pricing structure is going to be very different, right? And the expectations of you as the consumer is very different. And the most notable way that they're different is, dude, the guy on the internet who's selling you his services is not accredited. You're not getting any credits for the education that you're learning. It's the difference between saying, I've learned how to do some statistical technique by watching 3 YouTube videos versus I took XYZ class on, right, that statistical technique. The one translates into more pay, the latter one, and the other one is, oh, that's kind of interesting that you did that, right, the prior one. That's kind of also why firms exist as well, is that first, in terms of consumers buying things, they're going to buy things from legitimate firms. But the other side of this is that firms exist because from the, there's a whole bunch of efficiencies that come out of centralizing the production process. So when you centralize that production process, again, every task that's done, like if you ask me an advising question, I'll fuck if I know, right? I don't know what you need to take to get out of this university, right? I mean, I make all the schedules for all the econ classes on this campus, but I don't even give a lot of thought to like what you need to graduate. That's not really my job, right? That's when, you know, someone from the advising office calls me and says, dude, Scheiding, you have to offer this class or 3 people won't graduate. Okay, right, so then, right, then I do what I'm supposed to do. Financial aid, same thing. I don't know what any of you are paying, and quite frankly, I don't even care if your bill is paid in full. I don't worry about all of these little tasks that go behind it. And plus, I don't even have to worry about what to pay, you know, how much to pay different employees. I don't have to worry about so many things. Now, again, I could choose to be worried about those things, and I could then decide to go independent, but the profits might be greater in going independent. So in my wife's industry of finance, that's really the big difference between most of the people in my wife's industry is there are either people that are part of a bigger brokerage house like my wife, which means everything she earns is commission, but most of that commission is taken by the big house, right? The big house that basically is the firm that she works for. On the other side, she doesn't need to hire a lawyer. She doesn't need to hire a firm that's she doesn't need to hire a real estate agent to find her where her office is going to be. She doesn't worry about any of that stuff. That's what the home office does, but a part of her commission goes towards that. When you become a really big known quantity of a person in finance, you then typically go independent because you're like, why am I keep paying all this money to a home office that needs me more than I need them, right? So firms exist then to, in some sense, make money off of that efficiency that comes from combining all the workers. Now, Karl Marx would say, dude, that efficiency is entirely exploited by your boss, right? By the bourgeois class that owns the capital. I'm not getting into any of that discussion. I'm sure, dude, who doesn't hate their boss on some level except you two, right? But everyone else hates their boss to a large extent. I mean, actually. I mean, my boss, I mean, I've got 3-4 bosses, state organizations, I have lots of bosses. It's ingrained in my psyche to hate my boss. No, I mean, it doesn't help that like I'm the union rep too, so I mean, I'm already thinking that way. But I'm not getting into a discussion of does your boss exploit you, but I think there has to be some recognition of the fact that no one's going to go through the bother of creating a firm if they're not going to make money by existing, right, by organizing themselves. No one's doing this for status or for reputation. People are doing this for money. So that's why these firms exist, which is all, if you found this slide interesting, then you're what we would call an industrial organization person. Because then the whole idea is, and you can take entire courses on this. I know Manoa offers this course, I think every semester. Basically, it's called industrial organization. Why do certain firms exist in certain ways? And it's the whole called theory of the firm. Basically, a micro topic. The computer is really upset with me. Or it's really slow. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to this, but this is going back to the second slide. So basically what the firm has to do is it has to think about what are my inputs, right? So the Subaru discussion, again, I'm talking about a lot because it was a thing I did right before class. But it was, again, obviously produce these cars. They have to figure out which of the two assembly plants to produce this car at. Right, so if a lot of people on the West Coast are buying a certain model, it might make more sense to make that car in Japan than make it all the way in Louisiana. But it also might make sense to say, well, what are the transportation costs? What are the, right, all the various factors? But that's what the risk the firm takes. Is we put together this car using assembly line technology. Once this assembly line technology is made, then we bring in parts from other firms, right, the suppliers, and at the assembly line, we put together all the parts from all the various suppliers, package the car together, sell it to the dealership, right? So most of the money in the sale of the car is made by the manufacturer, not by the dealer. The dealer is just a franchise that, you know, basically gets kind of screwed in this kind of transaction. Because they're the ones that are negotiating on the price. Subaru's already been paid the thing that they've been paid. Right, so we can imagine doing this exact same production decision of the firm for the dealership. So even if we just look at this school, right? I mean, there are multiple production activities occurring on this campus right now, right? I mean, there's obviously a class like this, but then we could even say there's an economics concentration going on. There's a general education program going on right now. There's a business division program going on right now that this course is for. So this course is an input to several different kinds of outputs. With the cost constraints then being, well, this class is actually pretty easy to run at this time because there's not a lot of stuff going on this campus. I'm probably the most expensive thing in this classroom right now. So that was the idea of that this class can't run if it has fewer than 10 students, right? So that's kind of the requirement of, we're not gonna run a class if it has so few because then what's the point? And the only reason why then, sometimes classes have like 2 or 3 people, but then it's because the program that they're a part of is so small that the course couldn't run otherwise. So what are they going to try to do? They're obviously going to want to maximize output in a cost minimizing fashion. What were we as consumers trying to do? We were trying to maximize our utility on the lowest budget constraint. So there's, again, that same kind of mentality that's going on here of maximizing something subject to a constraint. Here it's a cost constraint, and I'm trying to maximize production subject to that constraint. Whereas for the consumer, I was maximizing utility subject to a budget constraint. So this is going to be like our indifference curves. This is going to be like my budget constraint. This is going to be what it looks like when I put the two together. Where we're going to simplify it and have just 2 inputs. The one input will be labor, and the other input will be capital, which will be the equivalent of when we had 2 products for exactly good what? Food and clothing. So we'll simplify this a little bit to just be LK instead of good 1, good 2. It's the same 3-step process that we followed for the consumer. Let's do it. Lots of people get their nails done before Valentine's Day. I would suspect so, right? So will you be pretty busy leading right up to it? You wouldn't think that people would do their nails that early then, right? Because won't they like screw them up during the week? Yeah. Or they could wear thick gloves all week, right? To like not look like that weird person. Yeah. Okay. So as I was saying here, we're going to divide everything into 2 very simple groups in terms of the inputs. But the most important thing would be is what is the technology, the way in which labor and capital are combined. So that's what technology is. Production technology. Technology is not like computers or whatever your GP mind is thinking of right now. whatever the technique, the process is that combines labor with capital. It's whatever your processes, techniques, or it could be actual technology that combines workers and capitals together. So again, if those are the key inputs, are labor and capital. Some way we have to marry the two, right? So in the case of this classroom, this is a pretty easy production technology to understand. There's usually in a class, one professor and one classroom, and one class, right? I've never taken a code. I've never been a part of a code talk class. Have any of you ever been in a code talk class? Yeah? What is it, like a hot mess, or what is that like? Two professors talking at the same time? How does it work? Like, what he said, what she said.
Mostly it was, one professor's new.
Yeah.
So it was just making sure.
Oh, like remember when we were, yeah, remember when we were like kids and like in elementary school, and there'd be like that like fake teacher for a semester, and then the real one? You guys don't do that over here? Oh, really? Your mom got replaced with a fake mom. Your mom is getting X'd out of home teaching, homeschooling. Yeah, but even then, right? I mean, I guess you could do co-teaching, right, mom and dad, but usually, I mean, when you do homeschooling, doesn't one parent usually take it on and the other one's like, go to town, right? I mean, usually, right? So who did it, your mom or your dad?
Mom.
Yeah, usually, yeah. It usually works out that way. It's funny, you know, as a person in a teaching profession, I don't think I would do it. I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could teach, because it'd be too tough. I mean, no, I mean, I really would today. Oh, it was such a long discussion about, yeah, today it was such a long discussion about, remember in lines for this play, he has to do with, there's like a python and a leopard, and he's the leopard, and all these lines he has to remember. And I'm saying, it's not just the delivery of the lines, it's how you deliver the lines. I'm acting like I'm a thespian, and like, you know, whereas, I don't know, maybe if it was just preschool at home, maybe you just say figure it out. Okay, so this class is pretty easy. One professor, one classroom, one computer, class is taught. We can imagine other ways in which it's more complicated. So for instance, the way in which we purchase products at a store is going to be different whether we buy it in person or online. What's going on here?
I don't know. Yeah.
You don't think that's creepy? You don't think that's creepy?
Why do you think I was staring that way that
creepy,
entire
you know,
time?
That's creepy.
I think the best part is like he like looked under the.
Let's see again. You don't
the
think that's
screen
creepy?
to see like if he was bothering me.
Should I turn it down? I'm not gonna do it. Or like really
Open it, open it.
Okay.
I'm gonna run away from the
And then everyone just looked.
Did you look? Did you look? Right, come on. Why would you look? I shouldn't teach class in the afternoon. I'm giddy. Yeah, maybe he's.
When I was on my way in.
Or they're spies under the guise of a photography class, right? Spying on the flowers. Yeah, putting bugs like literal like sound, you know, like listening devices in the flowers so that when we walk outside and talk smack about someone, the devices listen to it.
Very focused. You never looked over.
That's good. We should assess it. Yeah. I've never taken a photography class, but I thought that like dark rooms were like the important thing, like how to develop things, and now it's not done anymore, right? I mean, it's all digital. Okay, so what do production functions usually look like? Usually, what we would do is we would understand this production function where the output is on the left-hand side, the input's on the right-hand side of the equation. with K standing for capital, L standing for labor. Now, if you had taken intermediate macro, this should be a very familiar production function. This is no different than what you had already seen. This is just kind of inspired by it, but on a more micro standpoint rather than macro standpoint. K stands for capital because in this case, economics was originally a Germanic discipline, and in the German language, capital is supposed to be K. And economists just never changed it. The L standing for labor. This could be either standing for labor units in terms of people, labor hours, any one of those things. And what we're doing here is we're trying to find the maximum production. So you see that kind of in the definition. The highest output that can be produced for those inputs. So obviously this is a 2-hour and whatever minute class. I seem to waste a lot of time, so I'm obviously not reaching my fullest potential, right? As opposed to me starting on time, ending on time, you know, doing hardcore stuff the entire time. So this would be 100% efficiency. The whole point of some discussions is sometimes trying to understand how are we inefficient in what we're doing. And the most important thing would be distinguishing between the short run and the long run, with the difference in these two time periods being, are there inputs that cannot be changed? So that would be the difference between short run and long run. In the long run, everything is variable. Everything can be changed in the long run. But in the short run, this campus is going to be here, and I have a labor contract that goes until 2021, right? So, right, if all of a sudden no one wants to go to school anymore, the state's going to owe the lease payments or the bond payments that were used to pay for this campus to the bond holders, and I'm going to have to get paid at least till 20. But after that, we're in the long run, which means, again, if you're trying to restructure an institution like this, or even restructure any business, right? So let's go back to like the Radio Shack example, right? They're stuck with stores. It takes time to close the stores, right? So if you want to remove your footprint, you're going to, again, have to think about short run versus long run. How long is it going to take me to shut down these stores? How many employees do I need in the short run to shut down all these stores? And in the long run, we can go out of business, right? Because stores will be shut down, we'll have no employees. How long that takes is the nature of your business, right? I'm in a very long-dated business, which means change is very slow at a university. Whereas in a business, hopefully in a private business, change occurs rather quickly. And when it doesn't occur quickly, then you go out of business because you didn't do what you were supposed to do. So in that case, it's applying to a company that went bankrupt. But again, if you're something like Best Buy, which managed to avoid bankruptcy, right? The key for them was finding ways to get rid of unprofitable stores and employees and move things around as quickly as possible. And if they hadn't done that, right, then you go out of business. So the fixed input, generally speaking, and now this is where this becomes an American-centric concept that I'm giving to you. For the most part, labor is considered always variable, and capital is considered a fixed input. Primarily because we live in a country, the United States, where almost all employees are considered at-will employees, which means I can fire you because I don't like that you wore the color black today, right? I mean, I don't have to, the only thing would be I can't fire you because you're pregnant, or I can't fire you because you're a female, or I can't fire you because wheelchair, right, some disability, pregnancy, gender, and age, right? Outside of those few protected categories I just gave you, right, I can fire you for a different reason, right? I don't like your last name. What are you gonna do, right? I mean, you can try to sue me, but I'm a big company and there's no even basis for it. That's the United States. If we were in Europe, it would be a very different story, where employees are not at-will employees as much, meaning that they are then the fixed inputs, or even unionized versus non-unionized employees. But capital is pretty much our fixed input that we're going to then be dealing with, which then is just going to be different based on how long does it take me to get rid of that capital unit. So that's what you see here. So here's a production function where you're seeing, here's my labor, here's my capital fixed in quantity. The labor and capital are combining in a multiplicative fashion to give me, so it looks like 2LK. Where is it? No, what is it? What is this production function? No, it's fine. Anyway, it's some way that the labor and capital are combined to produce the output. I can then find out the average, but what's more important to me are the marginals. So what I'm more concerned about most of the time is, should I get bigger or should I get smaller? Right? And there's a consequence to being too small for too long, and there's a consequence to being too big. Some would say, right, that was the problem maybe even that Sears had, right, would be that they were too big, that they had too many stores. You could say that some people would say right now, for instance, in the university system, maybe we have too many community colleges, right? Do we need however many we have? I don't know, right? I mean, you would hope that someone will figure that out for us on the leadership. But again, that's not for us to deal with in the short run. That's again, a long run situation for us to deal with. We combine that labor with that capital to produce the output. And then it looks like I got cut off. It looks like it's the same problem as last semester. It looks like the same problem of we're missing the deltas, triangle Q, triangle L. So deltas, again, when you see deltas, it stands for change. So what this is saying is that the marginal product of labor, which we could describe as MPL, marginal product of labor, subscript labor, would be my change in output over the change in my labor input. That's that last column there. So what I'm primarily concerned about is that when I go from adding the fourth employee, the third to the fourth employee, then I can see that my production went up by 20 units. And that's what we're seeing right here. So the triangles got cut off there. But that's important because if you're gonna get bigger, you're gonna get bigger in the short run by doing what? What's your only way to get bigger in the short run? Exactly. That's the only way to get bigger is more labor, because my capital is fixed. Right? So if I said I need 3 times as many economics classes tomorrow, I can't build another campus, right? I can't even hire necessarily even more people, right? In some sense, I'd have to teach more. But I mean, but even if we said it was within a year, so I had enough time to hire more employees, but I don't have enough time to build another campus. Whenever I have to ask every year if we want to hire someone, we have to make a justification. The way you make that justification is by creating a narrative of how many students did you teach, how many classes did you teach, right? Because that's how I generate revenue for the firm, right? The UH system. So this is my 4th year. So in 3 years, I've taught over 1,000 students, and my classes are 90% full on average. And I keep track of that because I, at some point, right, don't want to be doing as much as I'm doing right now, which means I need to make an argument that, dude, right, the company, the firm, is always going to want to minimize costs, meaning they don't want too many Scheidings here because we're more costly. But at the same time, there's only so much I can do. So I need to be able to make an argument to them that another economist will be just as productive, if not more productive than I am, and generate as much, if not more, revenue per person. So that's the key thing, because part of this as well is, right, I know, for instance, if I open another cheesecake factory, I absolutely know my sales will go up. But the question is that by opening the 1,000th store, is it growing, are my sales growing by more or less or the same as it was when I built the 999 store, 998 store, 997 store? At some point, as you see right here, I can keep hiring employees in the beginning, right? So when UH asks me for that justification, they're trying to figure out, am I in this region, or this region, right? There's kind of three regions here. There's one region where each employee added is adding more productivity here, right? More stuff is being done per employee. Like right now, there's Dr. Yu who's teaching like the students that need 130 and 131, but I'm the only other person that teaches above that. So, dude, I keep making the argument, and this is not me pitching more. You guys shouldn't care, right? But I mean, but there is a logic, an economic logic to why what I'm asking for what I'm asking, and why they're asking for what they're asking for. Because again, I need to make the argument that by hiring another economist, we can teach a whole bunch of upper level economics classes that were here. And again, they want to avoid a situation like psychology, right? Psychology's got a bajillion professors, right? I'm not saying they're here, they're not, they're probably not, right? But you can imagine it gets so big that when an organization becomes that big, that there are what we would consider shadow employees or fake employees that basically just steal from the company, and they even go unnoticed because the organization is so big, right? UH would be a perfect example of that, being the largest employer here on the islands by far. We employ more people. Well, we are state employees, but it's more than actually work for the state. I am sure there are some fake employees somewhere in this very large employee system that are not doing it and are stealing from it, right? Because that's what's happening here. Is that by hiring the 10th employee, my production actually went down from 108 to 100. Which means that, let's say I'm that 10th employee, and Ian was a really good employee. I'm now wasting time with him because I created a fantasy football league, right? And now he's getting taken away from doing that. Or, even if I'm not doing that, I got hired to manage the inventory, and I'm putting it in the trunk of my car, right? I mean, right? And maybe it's not noticed because there's two other inventory manager kind of people, right? And this doesn't sound that far-fetched for most of us. For parts of large organizations, we probably all encountered that idea that where I feel, dude, we don't have enough people, right? Versus, dude, we have way too many people, right? And again, that's what you're trying to figure out. And there is a science, this obviously looks like a science when you look at it this way, but it's also somewhat a gut instinct at a firm level, because you're not going to know these things all the time, right? How many stores are too many stores? Right? How many employees are too many employees? A really highly paid consultant can tell you, but even then, you're not going to get an entirely accurate answer of how many is too many. Okay, so the most important thing here are, again, the marginals. Again, the triangles got cut off here, delta Q, delta L. The deltas got cut off here, but the marginals are the important thing, because you know, most of our, well, now he's taking a picture of my office. Well, maybe not. Maybe he's just taking a picture of my water office. I get paid a wage, obviously. My total wage and benefits, if you added everything up, I think that I end up costing the state. Again, wages and benefits, I think I end up costing like 160, I think, wages and benefits, which would mean I better generate that much in student credit hours as revenue. I better be generating not necessarily enough graduates to justify that salary, but I mean, if anything, if I'm not doing that, I at least need to do better than my peers. My peer faculty members in terms of generating student credit hours. So the idea would be is that right, because the alternative in my business is the adjunct instructor, right? The person who just shows up for a single class. They get paid $3,500, $4,000 typically to teach a class. That's my problem, right? How am I going to justify hiring a big expensive person like myself when there's someone else that's willing to do the job to teach the same class, the same marginal output, but their cost is now very different. So you get a sense too, right, of this production function, right? It would be why, for instance, when all of you took English writing, what is it, 101 or 102 or 120? What is it? What's the English writing class you all have to take? The first one?
100.
100, right? When you all took 100, you probably didn't take, you probably took it with an adjunct, more likely than not. Nothing wrong with an adjunct, but the problem from my perspective is, right, it's hardly for me to hire the full-time employee when there's this other employee that's a more cost-efficient, cost-minimizing solution to the same output. Again, maybe you'd want to say something like, well, I can only hire that adjunct one course at a time. I don't know if they'll always be here, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have to do, as a full-time employee, I have to do other things for my job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what you notice there in those three regions I was talking about is that the production function then has a shape that looks like this. So this is very similar to intermediate macro, where the total production function for the country looks actually rather similar to the total production for the firm basis, or for the individual firm basis, which would mean that starting at the origin and going to point B right here, 0 to B, would be, if we got a second economist, I could focus on just macro, and the new person could just focus on micro. That'd be really efficient, right? Because now I don't have to do everything and be an expert in everything. I can just focus on one thing. So again, that's kind of part of my argument. Dude, we could be really efficient if I could just focus on one and someone else focus on another. If we were to hire a third economist, well, now we've got one person who's doing micro, one doing macro. Where do I put the other person? There's a lot of places I could put them, but so here, my marginal productivity is increasing at an increasing rate. So this is my marginal here. This is measuring, the dark blue line is measuring the slope of my purple line. So here it's increasing at an increasing rate. Here it's increasing at a decreasing rate. So that's getting me from B to about right here. So from B to about right here, I'm increasing at a decreasing rate. Meaning that from B to whatever the end of that solid line is that each successive employee I hire, I get a little bit more production out of them, but I don't get as much as the previous laborer. And the worst part of this then is the dash line, because at the dash line then every successive employee hired is a bad employee, not a bad employee, but is actually detracting from the productive process. Again, not to, I keep drawing on my own industry, but I'm sure you can make your own analogies with whatever company you work for. Some people say that's the difference between West Oahu and Manoa, that at Manoa, they're so big, but they're closer to this end of the spectrum. And over here, sometimes it's like we're undersized and we're more on this end of the spectrum, which explains partly why we end up getting more state resources per student than Manoa does, because whether it's actual or not, on some implicit level, there's a recognition that because we are so small, because we don't have a lot of workers, most of the time if you have one more worker, it's probably going to be more productive on this campus than at the other campus, just because of the general structure and overlapping of responsibilities and duties. The average is not that useful. I mean, it's somewhat useful, but more important is the marginal, because this is also going to dictate what the pay levels are. I'm going to pay workers according to their marginal productivity, even if you're not earning a commission. Obviously, that's the easiest way to link compensation to productivity, right? Or just make you work on tips, right? I mean, that would be a very easy way to do it. Which is the whole way then that you avoid getting too big. Because, right, in a Darwinian sense, you can't get too big. If you do get too big, the people will not earn enough money and they will quit and move on to something else. So the problem, again, emerges in, for instance, like the compensation plan for myself, where I'm not paid based on the number. Back in the day, there was a very famous economist, Thorstein Veblen, very famous economist. Thorstein Veblen, you don't need to read this stuff. Thorstein Veblen, professor in the early 1900s. He started out at the University of Wisconsin. Then he ended up at Stanford. Then he slept with the wife of the president at Stanford and got fired. And then they ended up doing a variety of jobs until he died. But the way that professors used to get paid is when you would pay your tuition, you'd be given, like, let's say 50 tickets. And every time you came to class, you'd have to give me the ticket. And then at the end of the week, when I want to get paid, I'd have to show all my tickets. And they'd take the tickets, and then I would get paid. Anyway, then when the guy died, they looked in his closet and they found this box full of tickets that he never cashed in. And you can't now ask the president of the university whose wife he slept with, so, you know, what are you going to do? And unfortunately, that's how I remember him by. If you like stories like I just told you, you could take History of Economic Thought in the fall with me. I know, I'm full of stories like that. So imagine another semester like this. I've got a closet full of T-shirts too. So don't think that, what? Yeah, I need more tickets, exactly. No, I actually only need enough tickets to run the class. That's all I need. I need 10 tickets. That's all I need. Which I see, and then they hear that, and I think, I bet you that's why professors did the required attendance policy, right? Even though it doesn't exist anymore, that method of compensation, that's why they're still doing it. Okay, I've already explained this, so I'm not going to add to this anymore, but the question would be is, why is it shaped like that? Why? I mean, that's what this slide is trying to kind of understand. So let's just go back the slide here. Question is, why is it shaped like that? I mean, it should make sense to you a little bit what I'm saying, that as the organization becomes bigger, it does become less efficient. But why? I mean, what is it that causes the production to decline per additional employee added? Why must it eventually have diminishing returns? So let me put this in a different perspective. When we did the consumer and they had to choose food and clothing, that was the example we had, they would buy more food, but there was the law of diminishing margin. So they got less and less happiness out of each food item they bought and out of each item of clothing they bought. Why is it happening here? Why is it eventually happening that the input is becoming less productive? Think about the way that this is structured and what the inputs and outputs are that you're looking at. Why is it eventually diminishing?
Because there's not enough capital.
Exactly. It's exactly the reason why. There's not enough capital to go around. So the idea here would be, I think you could, I don't think you could do it with this classroom, right? But there's probably some creepy classrooms where you can like slide a thing across and have two classes going on at the same time, right? Or maybe do 4 ways, I don't know, right? But basically, the capital items become too crowded, right? So the equivalent would be is, how many cashiers do I need when I've only got 2 cash registers, right? I mean, how much can I really do here, right? Or if I'm running a bar and I've only got 3 taps, right? How much can I really do with the 3 taps? How many employees can I crowd around those 3 taps? Or the example I always like, I do have a printer in my office, but for all the faculty in this building, the E building, there's only 1 printer. And in the D building, the other classroom building, there's only 1 printer. Which means that anytime anything's going to be photocopied to a large extent. You have to go upstairs in a locked room and wait in the line with other faculty members to all use this really big printer. Hey, you know, it's not that, I make it sound a lot worse than it is, but if you know you're gonna need to print like 100 things and it's the middle of the day, like you don't want to be a dick to other people, right? And you don't like people being a dick to you. So right, so you try to time it so that you're minimizing the impact you're having on others. But that's exactly what's going on here, right? Is that was probably fine a decade ago when there was like 2 people teaching here. But now it's a little bit more problematic because there's a lot more of us. It's the equivalent of 2 of why how many again Starbucks in there at Elmore? 5? You said?
Just figured out there's actually
6, right? So how do we figure out how many? Really 6? So where?
one on the phone.
Oh yeah,
consider
that's
it.
right. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, I guess.
I don't think it counts, right? I didn't
I
count.
don't think the Target one counts either because you're counting that one too,
It's
right?
licensed, yeah.
Yeah, 'cause that's not a legit one.
Or
But right, so that's the question of how many individual Starbucks do I need within the whole mall, but also how big should each store be, right? Because there's probably very good research that Starbucks or that the factory have done to determine how big should the average store be, how many employees should the average store have, et cetera, based on trial and error. Less so science of figuring out how big an organization should be. Most of the community colleges, for instance, here on the islands, most of the community colleges are between 3,000 to 4,000 students for the most part. You've got extra large size ones like Leeward, which is 7,000, but for the most part, they're all basically the same size. We are the same size right now as UH-Hero, right? And we are the 2 non-research oriented UH schools. So we're probably right on some level, we're going to have about the same capital infrastructure footprint and about the same number of employees, hopefully. Again, appealing to the idea that, and as James points out here, that's what makes them the transition to the long run. The long run then is, I can build more stores. I can expand the campus out. And what that does is it shifts the whole process then over. Which means then, why does Starbucks keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and not reaching seemingly that point where it starts to go negative? Because they keep expanding bigger and bigger their capital footprint over time. Until one of 2 things happens. Eventually, in the long run, they can hit this point. This point still exists in the long run. Starbucks is just hoping that they will either buy out their potential competitors like they did, although I don't know if Teavana is really a competitor, right? But if they're like, dude, people in East Asia drink tea, they don't drink coffee as much, so we're going to own that space, more power to them, right? If Gloria Jean Coffee, right, maybe they buy their competitors, right, to kind of lock up that space. So either the company will reach this point and not realize it and then start to get smaller, like a Sears, right? Or they'll just keep trying to expand out and just hoping to just keep expanding it out and expanding what they sell and then spin off other divisions to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay. And then what we see here is that the reason then why you start to do things like, well, I guess one way to do it would be, for instance, in my industry, right, I can teach online, I can teach a hybrid class, I can teach, there's lots of different ways I can teach. Now, just because I teach online, that's not the technological improvement. Remember what I said technology is. Technology is just changing the way that I interact with the capital to produce the output. So right, I use the exact same things to teach an online class as I use to teach an in-person class. I use that OWL, I am speaking, I'm using La Lima, all the same things we use in this class. All they were basically saying is that now I can do my work at like 2 a.m., right? And I don't have to care when you can come to class because you can just watch it later. That's all that we're saying that the technology is. Or, right, with McDonald's, I can use an app to order my food so I don't even need the employee to bring it up, right? Or that, like at Walmart or Target, I can do self-checkout rather than having the employee do it for me. Right, all these different ways. And again, I'm sure they want to make my life more convenient, but also it's, can I find ways to make the workers work better with the machines? So if you go to Target and you see a Target employee, you know, they pretty much, right, with their little fancy like phony thing, right, they can like figure out how much inventory they have of practically anything as long as there's a barcode scan, right? It's not saying necessarily the item is going to be there, but it's going to be according to their computer records of what they say is going to be back there. They don't have to go in the back and count up the inventory in the back room. Their little device tells them. The technology, again, is not that physical, that computer device. Rather, it's that you're arming the employee with a real-time way of figuring out what's in the inventory and directing the consumer to what they should be buying, right? Again, shifting this out with the hope then that that peak point keeps shifting to the right with each successive term, allowing the company to keep getting bigger, but not losing its efficiency in getting bigger. The question, the interesting question is, how do I know that when I went from production firm 101 to 02, how do I know that I actually delayed the point of reaching that point of negativity? How big is too big? Unfortunately, that's an unknown. There's no hard and fast rule how big is too big. We can think of firms that have a very large global footprint, like 7-Eleven. And we may make fun of 7-Eleven, but its global footprint is huge. Same with Western Union, huge global footprint, right? Operates in 120 some different countries, operates very simple cash transactions, and makes a lot of money in doing very small transactions where there's almost no risk, and they're getting a 20% commission. And think about this. And even things like Venmo and Zelle and other things like that still haven't killed their business, right? Because it's someone who doesn't have a bank account, someone who doesn't have a cell phone, trying to send money to someone else who doesn't have a bank account or a cell phone, right? They have a niche, and they've made sure that, right, Western Union, long ago, think back to like, Back to the Future 3, remember when he goes back in time to the 1800s, and that guy's got to send a telegram, right? My God, that reminds me. Do you know how old I am now? So this is amazing. So when I got my college admissions, when I got admitted to undergraduate at Notre Dame, you actually got sent a telegram of whether you got accepted or not. And that was only 1995, because there was no email, and they wanted to tell you right away. I got a telegram. What is that? It's amazing. It's like not that long ago. Yeah, but I mean, right? So there's a company right there. Western Union made its money on telegrams, and now does money orders. That's how they make their money. All a different way of, in a more pessimistic sense, of delaying the inevitable. The inevitable being that eventually we all die, or in this case, eventually all firms must die, which is what this is saying. And it's pretty hard to, there's one bank that's existed since before the US became a country, but even that bank merged with someone. So all banks eventually die. And we shouldn't think that banks exist in perpetuity. So Bank of New York, I think is 6 years older than the country. DuPont, they make like, you know, like material that they also make bombs. But I think they're early 1800s. In Japan, you've got some examples of companies that have existed for like 400, 500, 600 years. But that's a pretty ancient way of thinking of things. Most companies have a time frame of 100, 200 years. And it's pretty notable when they fail. So Lehman Brothers existed from right after the Civil War to 2008. So when they fail, it's certainly notable. Kmart has existed since late 1800s, I think. Nabisco, they make Oreos. They eventually merged with Philip Morris, but they also were late 1800s. Most of the time, the business gets bought up by someone else as the business is dying. And it reaches that point. So even though we might think the factory is great, even though we might think Starbucks is great, eventually at some point, someone will buy them out and eventually move that way. How long had Whole Foods existed before Amazon bought them? I think they were like 20 years, maybe 20, maybe 30 years, but they got bought out. I mean, it wasn't that, and it's not that they're doing a bad business. It's just that some other business perceives I can combine the labor and capital better and get them to grow smarter. Teavana wasn't a bad business before Starbucks bought them out, but Teavana, if you'd ever gone in the store, they sold tea supplies. They didn't sell tea, right? Now, Teavana, after being bought out by Starbucks and getting rid of their stores, now they sell Teavana tea, right? So there's a difference, right? Is that Teavana's management at the time, which was independent of Starbucks, said, we don't want to get into the that kind of business, right? We don't want to be in the restaurant beverage industry. We don't know that space well. That's not our thing. Someone else perceives that Teavana could grow to be a bigger brand by getting into that beverage side of the industry, and Starbucks had the expertise, but probably more importantly, they had the money to do it. Okay. Why don't I pick it up from this slide after a break? So it's 6:15, so let's take a break till 25 after, and then I'll pick it up in 10 minutes with Malthus. I need more businesses to be able to talk about. Factory.
What's the oldest company right now?
It's a Japanese company.
It is?
Yeah.
Is that a vehicle company?
No.
No.
I think it's a, I thought it was like a spice or a rice company.
That'd be right.
Yeah, it rhymes. A spice or a rice company.
I was wondering, you know Q earlier? Is Q the same thing as Y or no?
Yeah, Q's the same as Y. Yep.
Scheiding.
Yeah.
They fixed the vending.
No, they did not. Don't use that one. Use the one in D. That one is broken. That one-armed bandit has stolen my money twice this week.
I'm just checking.
Nope, it is a thief. It is a rampant thief. That one doesn't work. So I've just been going. Yeah. Okay, so here it is, 578 AD. That is so cool. Like, think about that. God would have been, right? Jesus would have only been 6 centuries old. Yeah, so what did they sell? Oh, it's a construction company. Sorry, it's a construction company. So they make Buddhist temples. And that is their business, Buddhist temples.
Oh, no, that company was bought out.
Did it say that?
The temples?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were bought out like 5 years ago, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so funny. Well, there you go. Let's get rid of this ad here. That's hilarious. So here we go. Companies that are over 200 years old. Yeah, and this is what I thought. So 3,000 of them are in Japan, 800 in Germany, 222 in the Netherlands.
It's gotta be the business culture.
Exactly. No, that's part of it. Exactly. Yep. Second oldest company is a hot spring hotel, founded in 705. Then in 707, we get a Japanese hotel, another Japanese hotel. Ooh, a ceremonial paper goods company in 771. And then we have a restaurant in Austria. What do you do there, right? Because when you open a restaurant, aren't you supposed to put like the first dollar and like frame it? So what do they do for that one? Like take the first Austrian, what would be the old Austrian currency? Look at this. The restaurant served Christopher Columbus and Mozart.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. I think the oldest U.S. company is Bank of New York Mellon, I think. Okay, you can't really count farms.
I was reading some finance news and stuff,
Mhm.
and ever since the internet meeting I've been reading all like the economic news.
Yeah.
So like a lot of it's like so pessimistic. Like,
No, it is. We're a really pessimistic group.
This morning they're like, oh yeah, like we're having too much debt.
Oh yeah, no, there's some really crazy. Yeah, no, today we passed 22 trillion. Yeah.
I was just thinking like, is it really being like all fucked up over, or like?
No.
Are we doing good debt? I mean, that we can like, it's there's good debt.
No, so actually more important news than that is look at what happened in China today. And I'm going to suspect you probably didn't read a story about it at all. But what's notable is that two very large Chinese companies missed debt payments today. Very large companies. So large that one company defaulted on a 1/3 of $1 trillion bond payment. Yeah, so so there is a definite slowdown in the Chinese economy right now. And no one is talking. I'm going to guess, let's just go here and let's just see. Maybe even the Wall Street Journal would have something about it, but not necessarily. Let's see. Well, the unfortunate part is that now China is so important that, yeah, I mean, when China is slowing down, we're all going to slow down. I don't think Trump's thing had anything to do with it because they were already slowing down. But let's just look here. Let's just see if anyone's talking about the Chinese defaulting on these two debt payments. It absolutely is. And the reason why it is because the local governments are the ones that are supporting the businesses, but the local debt is not, from an accounting perspective, counted the same way that national debt is, and the books are kept secret from everyone else, so no one really knows what's going on. Okay, so this is pretty significant, right? Like I'm looking through here, and I'm not seeing any story about it, and I'm going pretty deep here. Okay, well there is, again, China, but it's a different Here's a story that you saw, Jeans. U.S. national debt soars to 22 trillion. About 20. So the national debt now exceeds the GDP, which is, here we go. There we go. Check my microphone. I don't care that much, actually.
The section of the US budget that is required to spend that.
Yeah, so that would be the entitlement. So the it's like, who the hell's talking right now? It's like, where are you getting? Let me get to your answer here. But I'm curious about this. That's pretty significant right there. So even the government is saying right now that the Chinese economy is only going to grow by 6%, which would be fantastic for a country like our own. But China hasn't grown this slowly since like 1990. So that's pretty significant. If you find that discussion interesting, you should come to my class on Thursday where I will talk for almost 2 hours about this. But you're not going to want to hear this. But I will talk for almost 2 hours. Very true. So yields, again, reflecting the amount of risk that you're taking on for buying debt. That guy might look really weird, but he's probably one of the smartest people about how equity and bond markets, I mean, worldwide, this guy is probably this, he knows what he's talking about, I guess. I shouldn't say he's a smart. Mhm. And bow tie. Who knows that, right? Oh, more than that, but yes. I know you want to keep watching it. I want to watch that, what that guy's saying too. Right there where, well, okay. That's not Captain Obvious. That guy is not Captain. Okay, so yeah, no. So going most of the for the U.S., most of the budget is actually driven not by all the stuff that we always seem to be all up in arms about. Like, I'm certainly not in favor, but it's something very different. Like the wall, that's really small as a comparison to the whole budget. What's more important would be the big three, which would be Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Those three things combined, even if you adjust nothing else in the federal budget, that adds up to, if my memory serves me right, that's about half the budget right there. Well, let's look it up, just so that we can all be more informed. So, yeah, see, the military is about 20%, 15 to 20% entitlements in U.S. budget. Let's just look at Wikipedia, which probably will tell us pretty quickly. Yeah, so in terms of spending, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, yeah, that was about right. So it's about half of the circle here. And that's 2017. So Social Security, obviously very big. That's covering not only old people, but also widows. It's covering kids. It's covering people who become disabled during their working career. It's a safety net, basically. Medicare, we'd all know that. That's healthcare for the elderly. Medicaid would be healthcare for the poor, whether you're elderly or not. So poor people can be on both Medicare and Medicaid, but only poor people can be on Medicaid. So you can have some overlap on these two categories with Medicaid, someone being old and being poor, because they're not getting enough Social Security, right? So you could have all three buckets there. But this is all the other stuff. So the defense budget, that's obviously pretty big. That's $500 billion. But I mean, look at that. We spend about half of the amount that we spend on defense is just keeping our creditors off our back. So that would mean just paying our minimum payment, meaning we just pay our interest. Then all the things that we all complain about is this chunk here, which is about a quarter. So the non-defense part, that would be parts like Section 8, school lunch programs, things like that. And then the other things are, sorry, school lunches would be down here. Then this part would be like retirements for military veterans and federal employees, that kind of stuff. Most of the time, though, when we're complaining about stuff and allocating things, it's these much smaller categories here. Which means, as an economist, probably should talk about these three categories a little bit more. And when I say that, someone immediately starts to think, dude, you just want to cut it. And that's not necessarily the case. Let me give you an example, and then I'll get into really the lecture. So my wife makes more than me. She makes enough that, and the way that the Social Security laws are written, she only has to pay Social Security taxes on the first $120,000, for instance, that she earns every year. Social Security. So Social Security is, again, a payment by the employer, about 7%, 6.85%, and the employee pays about 7%, 6.85%. My wife still gets to enjoy the benefits of Social Security, but after $120,000 in income, she doesn't have to pay Social Security taxes. Is that fair? Maybe you could say it is, because maybe you could say rich people create jobs if you believe that. I mean, right? I mean, so there's an argument you could make, right? The argument's probably been made by a rich person before, right? But the other side of it would be dude, Social Security is not trying to help rich people, right? Rich people don't need Social Security. Poor people need Social Security. And the only way Social Security will run out of money. Let's see. What year were you born, Cody? 97. About 10 years before you need Social Security is going to run out of money. So when we say that, though, it's not going to actually run out of money. So there's two notions here. The one is Social Security will still collect enough money to pay you 3/4 of what you were promised, approximately, which isn't that bad. So it's not that you're not going to get nothing. You're just going to get less than you thought you were going to get. But let's say I wanted to find an easy solution to make sure you got all that you were promised. The easiest solution, and it really does cover the entire deficit right now in Social Security, is just remove that income cap. Just make rich people pay always 7%. And you remove the entire problem. So we don't have to say old people have to work to age 75, right? Or like really like Dickens' tale kind of things of like, old people working till their bones are tired. Again, I'm not trying to make this a class-based, let's soak the rich people. But on the other hand, that's part of the solution. So, and it's not untested, and I know I'm going way off topic here, but this is somewhat interesting. Medicare. So Medicare, we also pay for that all with a 1.45% tax on our paychecks. It used to be that when you then, so the Medicare tax is actually taxed for people at all income levels. So my wife does still pay the Medicare tax no matter how much she earns. But when you want to collect Medicare benefits when you turn that age, you have to pay a premium. Every year you pay, my memory serves me right, it's about $1,200. So you'll pay for your whole life this 1.45%. Your employer is also putting in the same amount. But when you retire, everyone gets what's called Part A. Everyone gets that because that's what the 1.45% paid for. But then you also most people get Part B, which is what they pay this $1,200 a year for. But if my memory serves me right, it was during the Obama administration when they were reforming medical or healthcare. They said if you're rich, you still get Medicare Part A, that's still part of your 1.45%. But if you're rich and you want Part B, you have to pay like $2,000 a year. Because it's not going to be as much of a burden because you're rich for you to pay $2,000, right? And a poor person might barely be able to scrape by enough to pay the $1,200 a year. So, right? Or the other side of this would be the rich people need Social Security, right? But now we're getting into some like crazy stuff here. Like, why should someone pay into something and not get anything out of it, right? I mean, maybe, right? I mean, I pay into the school lunch program, I'm sure, on the federal level, but I'm not eating school lunches for free, right? They were so good. Remember your favorite days from like grade school, right? Like there was always like Taco Tuesday, Chicken Nugget Day. What else were really good days? Don't you, any of you have these great days?
Everything in our high school were spicy chicken sandwiches with not too.
I remember the spicy chicken when you run that bun that was almost too small, right? Because the breaded chicken would almost overgo. What else was there? Oh, pizza day! I forgot about that. Yeah, and then remember there was also milk or chocolate milk, right? If you got there early enough, you get the chocolate milk.
At one point, there was also strawberry.
Yeah.
Really?
It was rare though.
Oh, I never got strawberry. No, it was always chocolate or white. And then I remember there was this era when you could only get chocolate milk on Tuesdays. You had to pay 5 cents more for it or something like that. Anyway, but just going on to something different. But I mean, we need to be having a conversation about this on a budgetary level. Hey, anyway, this should be actually for Gene's pointing out that we're now $22 trillion in debt as of today. That debt is largely driven by this. And we can go into a class warfare thing and say, dude, lazy poor people are sapping us dry, right? right, again, if you're Charles Dickens, it's exactly right in the Dickens tale, that's exactly what you'll say, right, is going on. Or you could just say, dude, the rich are really screwing us all over, right? And they're designing a system that ensures they don't pay what they should be paying for, right? So property tax is a perfect example, right? I don't, right? Eventually, at some point, I'll buy a house and I'll have to pay property taxes. And I'll probably pay in taxes, let's say, 15 times the amount that a poor person pays. But my water doesn't come out 15 times faster, right? Or I don't, the fire trucks don't come to my house 15 times. It'd be so cool if they come 15 times faster to my house than someone else's house. I mean, there's also this kind of obligation we understand taxes to be where everyone puts into a pool and gets out of a pool. And you might find that my conversation right now is really creepy and disconcerting and I shouldn't get too much into politics, but on the other side of that, I mean, that's kind of what we as a society, I'm not getting on a pulpit here, but I mean, we kind of have to have that discussion because that's exactly what this is. Unfortunately, we're really stuck over here, which is fine too, right? But dude, buying birth control pills for women isn't really adding a big chunk to this, right? I mean, it's big deal if you're a Catholic like myself, right? Of course it's a big deal, but it's not bankrupting us either, right? I mean, I can have moral views, but that has nothing to do with financial views. That's kind of what we're having here. Now, again, this reflects who we are as a society, whether we build a wall or give out cheap pills, or right. That's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but you can't say that it's bankrupting us though either. So that's against the Democrats. The Democrats who say that we are, if we build a wall, we don't have the money for it. I mean, of course we have the money for it. Okay, well now I can resume this. Let's go into other stuff here that you probably will find less interesting, but also important to know. Okay, so Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus is an important economist from the 1700s. There are still a group of economists out there who I think are called the Club of Rome, I think, which is this idea that, and Thomas Malthus was one of the first kind of thinkers of this. The idea was that if you look at economic growth over a very long period of time, actually, there's a really cool chart that shows this. And for intermediate macro, you may remember this picture, you may not, but this is somewhat important. Well, it's important for me, so it should be important for you. But I'm gonna click on images, could be offensive. I'm waiting for the time of actually, it was offensive. Remember that dark week I had where I was like all depressed about things? That week when I did a Google search, it actually was depressing. Or it was offensive to some, I would suspect. If it wasn't, you've got to, you're morally empty. If it wasn't, this is not that controversial. I mean, look at this. So this is saying world economic growth since the time of 1270. And let's actually take it further back here. Let's see. Yeah, this one. This is, right, Jesus born, right? The average, what's significant about this is that the average person at the time of Jesus was as well off as the person in the, approximately in the year 1600, which meant that you basically had a millennium and a half of individuals, the same as their parents' generation, same as their grandparents' generation, which seems kind of foreign to us because most of the time, right, I mean, the general expectation, certainly in the United States, is that each successive generation is better off economically than the previous generation, right? I mean, that's kind of the way that it's worked out for the most part. But what you see here is that courtesy of things like the Industrial Revolution, you start to see this change. This change where all of a sudden, economic growth is occurring much more dramatically. And also, you remember at this time, the plague had just ended. So you had this widespread death of people, right, from the plague. And then all of a sudden, people are replicating again, right? And they're replicating to a point where Thomas Malthus enters and says, dude, we are running out of space. We are running out of space to grow the food that everyone needs. Which isn't like too controversial of a topic here, because the idea was if there is only so much land and we keep overgrowing this land, keep planting crops on this land, the land will yield yet less and less stuff. And I could throw all these people, I could hire all these people to, to work the fields, but again, declining marginal productivity, right? I mean, everyone's going to be picking things and everything's going to be overpicked. So he basically then predicted that everyone was going to die. Everyone was going to die because the world couldn't physically support with food all the people that existed on the planet, and we wouldn't be able to farm everything. But he was wrong, right? We didn't all die. And the reason why we didn't all die was because we found other ways to grow the food, right? Now, some of you may be very opposed to the way that it is grown. Factory farms, I know we talked 3 weeks ago in this class about how milk production is all kind of amassed by Walmarts, and they have big factory farms and dairies and genetically modified crops that are resistant to diseases and pesticides, and farmers don't go out there and physically pick the crops, right? They use tractors now that have GPS devices on it, and they do all satellite mapping and they pick everything, right? And you see this exactly here, right? Is that we are actually becoming better and better farmers over time with the same amount of land, right? If anything, there is less land. Or we're finding a way to grow crops in places where we wouldn't typically grow them. Again, like growing rice in California, pretty drought-stricken state. Probably shouldn't be growing rice there, but we are. So really, again, there are still people, as this last paragraph points out, dude, there are still people dying because they don't have enough food. We certainly know that. But that's not really an issue of the production standpoint. That's really more of our social policies. That's more of our prioritization of things. And we certainly know that, I'll think back to the day, right? How could you identify a rich person, 200 years ago, right? As if they were fat, right? That's why fat people are usually portrayed as the rich people in old, Shakespearean kinds of plays and whatnot, right? And the poor people are thick thin because they don't have any money. That's generally the case, although it's not as easy to make that correlation anymore because the food that poor people can buy is also really bad food, which can make you fat and unable to process the sugars and diabetic, and right? So not as easy as it used to be. Most of the time, though, it's not as much because of low productivity. Really, it's only when it's the country as a whole. So in this case, it's talking about like India, but also could extend to sub-Saharan Africa, where maybe you don't have all of the large-scale production techniques that you would have otherwise. Right? China's revolution in 1979 was introducing a tractor. Right? So they didn't have mechanized ways of picking crops up until 1979, whereas we had that obviously for decades and decades previous to that. But why am I talking about this? Why is this important to me? Is because Malthus basically failed to realize the idea that we could shift the production function up, right? So if we just go back on the slides here, what was Malthus saying? Malthus was saying, what he's saying wasn't incorrect. He's like, dude, after A, things get shitty and we all die. And what actually happened is we went to here, we went to here, we went to here, right? And so we keep going up. Eventually, though, we will all die, right? I mean, has to happen. And so there is still a Club of Rome. I think they're most grumpy about right now is that we're going to run out of oil. I think that's the thing they're worried about the most right now. I think the Club of Rome is located in Switzerland. How interesting. What? It's not in Rome, and I don't know why. I'm sure someone that knows more about the world would know why, and I'm not going to read that. I think the big thing they're worried about, though, so they make a prediction about what year we're all going to die. So let's see when we're going to die here. Anyone want to guess when we're going to die? Pick a year. Yeah, could be. I'm not going to read this whole report. Well, apparently they're worried about aliveness in social and ecological systems. I don't think that's what's not going to kill us. Probably we're going to run out of something. Well, yeah, I'm not going to read all these reports, but yeah, I think the general prediction is that we're going to, 2020, I guess, yeah, ends in 2020. I think the Club of Rome, I mean, the best way to describe these individuals would be is that they're really, ecologically, environmentally oriented economists and social thinkers. So they're, again, more worried. I mean, in some sense, they're like descendants of Malthus. And again, their concern is that the physical planet will run out of the ability to produce. So, for instance, they would be in favor of, let's say, and I'm not exactly certain because I'm not really one of them, but I mean, I think they would probably favor family planning. I think they would probably favor maybe old people should get to knock themselves off, right? I mean, they're concerned about population growth. Obviously, that's part of it, but they're also concerned about ecological depletion. So they would also be concerned with climate change, all those kinds of things. Okay, let's see what this MIT person said based on what the Club of Rome wanted. Oh, well, they predicted that we were going to die almost 50 years ago. So, you know what that means? Club of Rome is no better than Malthus, who they were inspired by. Haha, take that, MIT. They said we were going to die 50 years ago, and we didn't. Oh, I read that book. The Limits to Growth? I did read that book. I don't remember very much of it. I do remember reading it. Yeah. Yeah, it said here that the Earth cannot sustain present population and industrial growth for more than a few decades. And they said that in 1973. So it would be almost 5 decades ago, right? At least 45 years ago. Okay, well, dude, we're all gonna die. I don't know what more you need from me beyond that. So there we go. It just turns out that, if anything, food is cheaper than it used to be as well. Food is cheaper because we're becoming better at growing it. So again, the downside of that is, dude, if food is cheap, and really, I mean, if you think about it, even in Hawaii, dude, food is cheap because it's all gonna come. It comes almost exclusively from outside of this. So if you think about transportation costs, $5 for a gallon of milk isn't that bad when you're considering it has to be refrigerated and brought all the way over here. I'm not going to complain about it. It is generally cheaper. So what does that mean then in terms of all of this? Like what do we talk about when we get to the theory of this? Is that we need to then find ways, what the business needs to do as a firm is it needs to find ways to make the employees more productive. The way that you make employees more productive is by either giving them more capital or by giving them better capital. That's really the only two ways that you can do it. You either give them better capital or you give them more capital. Now, right, on some level, I only need, maybe I could have two computers, right? Maybe a laptop and a desktop. But right after two, you just become that weirdo that has too many computers, right? So then it's really then saying, we need to replace your computer every X number of years, or we need to get you the kind of computer that works for the kind of work you do, right? So the ancient professor that just sends 2 emails a day is going to be a very different person than the person who teaches online and streams videos, right? I mean, some very kind of basic examples here. Or the other way to do this would be that we change the ways that the things are used, right? So then that would be saying, like, for instance, again, older professors here don't have to teach online. It's not in their contract. They don't have to do it if they don't want to. I'm hired in a generation where I actually am I'm contractually required, although I don't think they enforce it, I'm contractually required to teach classes in alternative formats. This class counts as an alternative format. It's once a week, an evening. So this counts as an alternative format. Thank God for a union that negotiates stuff like that. But right, I mean, but again, that gives you somewhat of a sense here of what that production technique, how we can change that production technique, right? Is there's always a fear of a new technology, right? Because the fear. So have any of you ever taken a class in the HITS classroom, in the one that goes to Neighbor Islands, the one that's at the library? So this class was taught that way 2 years ago. But who would be concerned about that kind of class being taught? Think about it from a labor perspective. Who would be concerned about the class being taught that way? Exactly, an economist at Maui, an economist on the Big Island, right? Because I'm taking their job in some sense, right? So you now need to find some way to make it either disadvantageous for me to teach that class from here. The way they did that was I had to go to the other islands to teach the class. That really sucks, right? I mean, you know, like, I got better things to do with my day. I have better things to do with my day than to go and fly to another island to teach the same class, just beam it in the other direction. But it's a pain in the ass enough that, right, I'm not going to teach every class like that, right? Which is fine then because, right, now the Maui economist has saved her job. The Maui economist, oh, she's a crazy woman. I watch her. No, she is. So she teaches the class. You know, on Spectrum, you can watch like UH classes. So yeah, she teaches it on there. So I watch it because I'm like, yeah, I'm always self-conscious about am I teaching the right stuff here? So am I teaching in the right way? And so I sit and I watch her lectures sometimes, and yeah. Yeah, so this is and it's odd because, there's a part of me where I'm yelling at the TV of why is she doing that, teaching it that way? And then there's always some self-conscious part of me well, even a day like today, I could have been better today, right? I mean, but that's always the case. But again, why does this become important is because, right, I mean, it does highlight the inefficiency sometimes that we ascribe to union employees, to state employees, to even organizations that have nepotism, right? I mean, all these things are, why do we think that these things are bad? Because generally speaking, they stop this from happening because it endangers their livelihood, right? I mean, that's never a good solution, right? I mean, we call them Luddites, right? The people that what did the Luddites destroy? I think those were like, yeah, they were like sabotaging something, right? They were like French. So saboteur, right, a French term. So the saboteurs were workers that were destroying technological devices so that they could continue to keep their classic job. Right, so that's what this HITS classroom on this campus is all about, is someone in the union negotiating bargaining room was a Luddite and said, dude, you're gonna not have any, no, I can't, right? If I was on Maui, I might be concerned about my job, and people are just human, right? Humans are humans, right? And we're all have to look out for ourselves to some extent. But it certainly plays up to the fact of why people, for instance, don't like union members or state employees or nepotism, right? Is that it generally falls in the face, it affronts, it's a direct contrast to this happening, which is, dude, Radio Shack failed because Radio Shack wasn't the best way to buy resistors. I don't know what else there's, right, but it wasn't the best way to do it. And there were other stores that were better ways to do it. Some of them online, some of them, right? Some of them are better ways, and in a Darwinian sense, they go out of business, right? Whereas the Maui economists will continue to exist as long as there's a bargaining contract to say so. Now, it turns out, if you're feeling very pessimistic, not feeling patriotic enough, I'm here to help you today. As it turns out, we are the most productive workers in the world. We don't work the most hours. Sometimes we do, but the Japanese and the Koreans work the most hours in the world. The French work the least among the major industrialized countries. But now Germans too, I guess, and Germans. But what that means, though, is that we generally are organized around, right? It takes me a while to think of what groups are the ones that can resist labor productivity gains. And that's a pretty small, right? I mean, you might think on the islands, living here on the islands, that everyone's a union employee, but that's really not the case. I don't know, unions a lot. But I mean, it is important here because it is, from an economics perspective, it's an affront to, meaning it's opposed to this idea of labor productivity, for the most part. And that's the lack of, some would argue, not everyone would argue, what I'm about to say is not a fact, it is a statement of opinion, okay, so let that be known. But I think some people would say, and I'll give you the counter too, so it's not just me proselytizing. Some people would say is that it's the lack of unions and the ability to embrace any technologies that aren't illegal, that because we live in that kind of society, that's why the workers are as productive as they are. The idea that I can go on the web and search for anything I want, and that I have my own computer to do it, and that there's really no restrictions on how I use my capital devices with the work that I do, makes it so that I'm a pretty productive worker, even if I don't work the most number of hours, which again, the Japanese do. What was that term again? What's the name of our operation again?
The one where you work.
Yeah, you work really hard and you work really hard and you say that to the worker, the colleague at the end of your day.
Sky Summer?
Maybe, I don't know. Is that what it was? We have this operation going on. If they want to move to Japan, we named this operation something. You say to a fellow Japanese work colleague, so apparently you say that to your fellow Japanese colleague who's done a hard job that day, the hard work that they. So the Japanese are well known for being tortured souls of working very hard. And I don't think you could say that the Americans are working smarter, but they're certainly embracing more labor productivity, right? So what do we know about the Japanese economy, right? Not as bad as the Koreans in terms of nepotism, not as bad in terms of even the Koreans in terms of lifetime employment, and certainly has improved over time. But dude, in the United States, outside of Hawaii, right? I mean, those are pretty unknown things on the rest of the mainland. It's a dog-eat-dog world on the mainland for the most part. And so it shouldn't be that surprising that the labor productivity looks like that. The only thing that economists sometimes get concerned about is this slipping that happened right here. And this is something, by the way, that economists still have not figured out. Economists still have not figured out why there was this productivity slowdown before the war in Vietnam, or the end of the Korean War, basically, all the way out into the early 90s. Economists have no reason to understand why that happened, but the impact was significant. It caused the very severe recessions in the 1970s, and also the pretty severe recession that we had, almost catastrophic recession that we had in 1980, 1981. Which again, all before your time, so probably like ancient times, but it was significant. Now it's recovered somewhat, but why does it look like that? We actually don't know. I'll give you some reasons why. Somewhat important here. I wish I had a cigar or something right now. I'd want and a big cowboy hat because I'd want to be like an oil Texan kind of guy. I'd be having suspenders, and if I wore suspenders, I'd be doing that, right? And I'd be like, it's the fact that the EPA was created in 1972, and that these regulations forced my company that produces X to now do it in a more inefficient way, meaning that my employees had to make stuff where they couldn't just dump their excess paint down the drain. Now they had to like take care of it in an environmentally conscious way. Yes, it's good that I did things in an environmentally conscious way, but the only way it's showing up here is that I'm less productive as an employee. Now, what I might just have said to you is totally fine. You're totally fine with the environment being better and us being less productive. But maybe one of you is like, dude, I'll be dead by the time the earth is killed, so I don't care. I just want more stuff now. Either viewpoint is fine. I'm not judging here. That would be one viewpoint. Other viewpoint could be that in this time period, we did have oil crises. So the oil crises were the US basically supported dictatorships that other people did not like. So Shah of Iran, right? And Shah of Iran liked to kill people, lots of people. He was a really mean guy, but that was our friend in Iran. And then the younger generation in Iran took over. They said, dude, screw you, Americans. We're also not going to sell you oil anymore either. And none of our friends are going to sell you oil anymore either. So we had two oil crises. Now, the consequence of those oil crises were that my father told me these stories of like, he was working in a factory, but the factory was unheated. And he was operating a crane, but the crane could only be operated a certain number of hours a day because they didn't have enough oil to do all the things they were doing. So they basically had to reorganize the production process around a very scarce good, right, oil. And so maybe there's factors outside of our control that caused this to happen. If that were the case, though, and there might be some reasonableness of this, is that it obviously should have increased, but it should have increased even more so. I mean, obviously it's really low here because that's the heart of the crises. The oil crises are here in the 70s. And we did use a lot of oil for most things. We weren't that efficient, but it wasn't that significant. But it might have been a contributing factor. The third reason, so first reason, environmental regulations. Second reason, oil crises. Third reason. So the third reason could be is that it was right in this time period when the Department of Education was created. And the consequence of that was that perhaps children were taught less effectively. So for instance, the high school degree doesn't mean that created in 1930 was actually better than a high school degree that someone earned in 1970. Perhaps because now they know they're meeting a certain standard, but that standard is watered down from what they needed to know 30 or 40 years ago. So as the education process became worse, the products they produce becomes worse, right? Those employees becomes worse. So right, so I kid you not, this is the concern right now. The concern right now among economists is that kids don't know how to use money because they don't see money because they're using debit cards. So as some of you know, I serve on a committee on the Federal Reserve branch in San Francisco. For 2 days, I have to proselytize to Hawaiian youth, so youth in Hawaii, not Native Hawaiian youth in Hawaii about how to use money. I think they should probably, I'm sure my time is better spent on other things, but apparently I'm supposed to show them examples of what money looks like and how to divide it into the coins and how to use the coins, which the Federal Reserve is under obviously a requirement to maintain the money supply, and I have to do their bidding. So yes, I am required to show them how to use it. But that would be a perfect example of maybe the school system is getting shittier and the workers are not as good. And maybe again you could say, but why only in this time period? So this is where then typically Republicans who are more like anti-standards based, it'd even be more here like No Child Left Behind, that'd be kind of more this era. They'd be saying a homogenized educational system is making students dumber, and that dumber students are less productive. Maybe, I mean, I'm not saying that that's happening, but all these examples I'm giving you, I hope that you're also seeing, well, yeah, the oil crisis did affect Japan as well, but other things didn't affect it. Their educational system has changed, but certainly didn't change in exactly these same time periods. Why on a global basis are these same trends happening? Fourth reason, which is actually probably the most likely candidate that we believe in right now. The most likely candidate that we believe in why we're seeing this is because what do we make more of, Kristen? Products or services?
Services.
Yeah, exactly, services. So services, that's all right, you guys are twins. So, right, but services are actually notoriously hard to measure, harder to measure than tractors, right? So it might just be that I'm not as good at measuring all these services that are being produced, and that I'm actually getting, and it's true, I'm actually getting better at measuring services as I have more experience with them. And it's true that in the 1970s forward, the transition on a global basis was more services produced than physical goods produced. And maybe we're just getting better at measuring what's actually being produced. Who knows? But what this also means, the reason why this is important, like why do economists care so much about these growth rates, is because this should, in a normal operating economy, should be what's driving your compensation growth on a year-to-year basis. That's why you should care. The more productive you are, if the world is fair, and if you believe the world is fair, this should be exactly driving how much additional compensation you get, which goes back to this idea that the next generation should always be better off than the previous generation. That's why you see this. And if it's not happening, it then becomes an existential crisis. Right, so the existential crisis on the continent of Europe is this idea that things are not as good for the current generation as they were for the previous generation. Or if we look at our US economy, productivity growth, well, let's not be fast and loose about this. Let's be real about this. Where am I going to go, Levi? If I'm going to look for data, where am I going to go? That's right. And Jacob, who makes Fred? Do you remember who makes Fred? No? So Fred Oh. Huh?
The mom and dad.
No. This would be the Federal Reserve Economic Database. So, oh, this computer's not working. Let's see this one. Nope. And we're not talking about Fred Figglehorn here. Fred Figglehorn, the famous YouTube star. Is he famous? He's not famous anymore, is he? Yeah, right, yeah.
So could universal basic income be an extension of the homogeneous choices?
Yeah, so this universal income thing is like the key. It's this really cool thing that economists are playing with right now. So this universal basic income is the idea that what if I told you that you could have $25,000 a year to do whatever you wanted to do with it, right? So if you just quit your job, you could go back, you could use that money to go to school, you could do whatever you want with that $25,000. So it's very different, but it appeals to that idea I talked about last week, right? That whole idea of hitting a budget constraint, right? Where I have a corner solution, where I can't consume more. So this idea of universal basic income is designed to say, dude, people know how to spend the money themselves better. And the idea would be, right? So instead of giving someone food stamps every month, they could choose to go to school, right? And, right, pursue more education. Oh, look at all these cool people walking. Are none of you, there are any of you, and did I ask this, what's that guy doing with his arms? Why is she writing so fast? Is that in this classroom?
No.
Oh,
It looks so determined.
they do. Yeah, Jacob, do you know the backstory on this? No? What do you have to do to get on these?
They literally just come in and do it. One, a couple of years ago, I was sitting in a class and I was like 2 people away from the film.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they just like cute people, like pretty people?
No.
Or like can ugly people like me get in this video somehow? Or
I really don't know because like I don't even remember why.
I mean, you and I aren't going to be in these videos, Jacob. I mean, you know, like,
His face, right?
yeah, you know, yeah. What do I need to do to get in this? Yeah. No, I need to be like. You need to be saying something interesting. I need to be like this. I'm like, yeah. And, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It used to be a 1980s montage.
Yeah. No, exactly. We need a song. We need something by like The Cure or something like that. A New Order. Worker productivity. So we won't be using that this much in class, but the Federal Reserve Economic Database comes out of the St. Louis Federal Reserve. And what's nice about it is that it pretty well collects economic data from a variety of sources. And the source here would be, I want to show you. What I want to show you is important here. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to look. Let's look at this first. Non-farmers. Let's edit it so I can see percent change, annual basis. Worker productivity on an annual basis. Let's look at it for the past 10 years. So we are becoming more and more productive, especially as of late. Why were workers, this is kind of interesting. Why is productivity shooting up so much here? I mean, what's that causing here? So what's the recession causing here? What do we think might happen here? Yeah, and what else are you worried about? you're paying your house, and what else are you worried about? Well, what's that, right? So everyone around you got fired, laid off. So what are you gonna do? Exactly. Work harder to not get fired or laid off. Exactly what you're gonna do. It's exactly what you see here, and this is exactly what happened. The fortunate part there, if you're the employer, is you don't have to pay for all that productivity gain because people are so happy to be, right? And that's the whole idea too. Who are the ones that get laid off first? Are the least productive workers, right? They're the ones I get rid of first, and then the only ones I have left are the really productive workers. But then at some point, productivity or output picks up, and I have to start hiring less, all right? I got to start hiring the Jacobs of the world, right? And they all start getting in, and this brings it all down, and then we recover. Now, what this then predicts is that I should see about 1% average compensation growth then over time. So let's see if that's happening. Let's see here. Let's add a line. Weekly wages. Yeah, add data source. Okay, so I put two things on here. I put productivity and I put average real wages. So real meaning I'm taking out inflation, so I'm just controlling this. I'm just having constant dollars here. So a dollar is always a dollar, not like the fact that dollars are becoming less valuable. What's useful about this, right, is that we should see them moving around the same direction, right? That's at least what the theory told us we should be seeing, is they should be moving in the same directions, which we are seeing here. Until this, right here. So what's happening here? What's happening here? We live in a very unique economic time that's really only become unique since 2014.
People are being paid more than they're working.
Partly.
Lack of education or service.
Could be lack of, yeah, could be. What else?
Is that when all of the minimum wage like wars started?
And that could actually be contributing to it. Yep. So that could be artificially inflating low-skill employees to a higher rate. What else? So I hadn't thought of that one, but that does have a role here. What else? There's the response I thought of, which might play a role in this as well, but this would be employees able to negotiate higher wages based on the relative scarcity, meaning 0, right, 2%, 3% unemployment. And so they have more bargaining power over others, even if they are a shitty employee. And if you are a skilled employee, then you're really able to find something much better. And it might be outsized from what your actual productivity is. So the perfect example is this guy. I like the guy. I really mean him. He's a really good guy. He was at my wedding. He's one of my groomsmen, a really great guy, and a student. So it shows you, if I have to get married a second time, one of you could be in the wedding. One of you could, God, today's getting creepier and creepier. I say as only an example. Pete. So Pete's a nice guy. Pete Cellini. So Pete Cellini is also a data scientist, a very highly marketable, demanded skill right now, which basically means that when customers fill out surveys, when suppliers fill out their production schedules, he works for a company that basically analyzes all that data to guide business decisions, right? And that's, right, if you look at that skill set, it really only started to become valuable at the time we had the computing processes power to process all of that data. And the realization for those getting MBAs and learning how to do business, that data was actually valuable, that we could actually use it in some way, shape, or form. It's obviously leveling off now. So why is it leveling off? We still have low unemployment, but why is it leveling off? Why might it be leveling off? It could be that more jobs are being created, so then that would reduce the idea that the workers are as scarce as they are, right? There are more jobs where those workers could go to. Yeah, Everett?
More automation.
Yep, so part of it could also be exactly that, more automation, right? So if Uber can drive, the car can drive itself, I obviously don't need that person. But also it's this whole idea, again, of the gig economy, right? That I can also create contract employees to do things that I typically would have hired them for, right? I mean, that's also part of this. But also part of it too is just this whole idea that, you know what, like as a business, I might say, you know what, I'm gonna raise your pay with like an annual extra payment, but I'm not gonna give you a permanent wage increase, right? So that's a very popular thing. For instance, when the faculty members were all going on contract negotiation, the governor first offered $500 for everyone for just a year. No one wanted that. The employees didn't want that because what it meant was that your base pay didn't go up by $500. It's just you got $500 extra that year. But if everything's always based on what you earned in the previous year, you want to fight for a permanent increase to your wages. Now, in our case, we are able to get it, but you can easily imagine that if you're just separate employees, all separately negotiating, bargaining on your own, and the business says, dude, everyone gets $500, no annual wage increase. Right? Well, if you don't like it, go somewhere else, right? And that's kind of what's happening here, right? Because we do live in a Trump world to some extent, like it or dislike it. In that Trump world, the company basically has a little bit more power in that bargaining position over us, meaning that, right, with the Trump tax cuts, most of the employees in the private sector that got additional wages got it as one-time increases, even though the benefits to the firm were permanent increases. Another way that the man's sticking it to us. I'm just going to create a whole bunch of.
Can you show further timeline for 2018?
What's the thing that's limiting us here?
It's up there on the top right. Has a date range.
No, I do see that, but something is limiting us, and I'm wondering whether it's this. Let's see which data is it that's limiting us.
Well, you can't just type it in that little bar over there.
No, I can't because there's one of the data points has not enough data. And I can't tell which one it is.
I just want to see if it actually crossed over.
That'd be a really good question. How would we figure that out? It's from the BLS. Okay, let's see. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the government agency that collects unemployment numbers. They would also collect most of these things. Let's see here. Never used this before, so this will be kind of cool. I don't like that. Productivity, is it going to let me graph things? Does it want to graph them? No, it might be there. I think my prediction would be is that it would have crossed over from 2017. It's only picked up since then. That would be my guess. I can look at this though and see. Well, let's just look at the EPI. So the EPI is a somewhat liberal-leaning economics group, so take that into account. So they're using a different data set. They're using the current employment statistics, so that will get us up to June of 2018. And so here they're showing that the wages did not grow at all. They do talk about the tax cuts, meaning that it put in place, it did limit the wage growth. Yeah, so you're really not seeing a lot of wage growth here at all income levels. Except if you're really rich. The really rich did pretty well for themselves. And the really poor did pretty bad for themselves. So yeah, $10.06 versus those earning $62 an hour. They had a higher wage increase. The productivity, again, would be the thing that we don't know as much about. See, this is liberal leaning, so just keep that in mind. How you present data is always going to be informed by your political biases. But it probably, right, I mean, it's obviously showing that the rich do get richer. And the poor are getting slightly richer, but not as rich as fast as the rich are getting richer. Oh, this is kind of cool. Did you ever think about then why do college students earn more money typically? The idea is that you're going to be more productive. And that you would see that right here is that that's the argument of what goes on. That's not entirely accurate though, because the person, what was his name? What was his name? Greg Pletko. Greg Pletko from my frat in college, he dropped out the last semester before graduation. And he earns significantly less now. I think he's selling like corn seeds somewhere in the Midwest. Nice guy, a really nice guy. Likes to drink a lot, which is why he had to leave a semester early, which was the reason why he was a great frat brother, but was the reason why he got kicked out a semester before graduation. Do you think you really learn a lot in the last semester before graduation? Wait, who's graduating this semester again? Is anyone graduating this semester? No. You really don't. I mean, for me, Mario Kart consumed most of my life that last semester. It was a lot of semesters. But the idea would be, again, that you do earn significantly more by having the binary condition of graduating rather than being one semester removed. Meaning that that argument that college people, educated people are smarter and more productive isn't entirely accurate. Certainly we can think of very productive high school graduates that have done pretty well for themselves and are quite productive. And I also don't think that high school dropouts, which is the equivalent of economic suicide, are totally unproductive people either. Do you know anyone that dropped out of high school? I guess you couldn't have dropped out, right? Because your mom would have killed you.
I went to charter school.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's right.
School, so because the laws here are your own school.
Really? That kind of
I don't know
sucks.
if it changed or not, but when I was doing it, that's why.
So you would still have, would you still have to take the GED test? So even if you're homeschooled, you have to take the GED test.
So you wouldn't even have a chance at a diploma. Straight.
Oh, fuck. Why didn't you just, I mean, you'd almost be better off just be like, cram everything into the kid by age 13. And then, what do you do for a 13-year-old? Oh, jockey, right? You'd be a horse racing jockey, right? What do small kids do for work? Coal mines, right? They'll get in there a little and get in there. Okay. Why don't I pick it up from this slide? I'll pick this up from here next Tuesday. So I'm going to try to finish up this section. Then we'll do the problems. Then we do, we'll probably at that point be at the point where exam will be handed out. And have a good Valentine's Day, everyone. Don't do anything stupid. Actually, what would you do stupid for Valentine's Day? Don't forget to get something for someone. or you'll get broken up with, and then you can actually spend more time on this class. So actually, maybe you should do something stupid, and then you'll become more focused and more productive. Do something stupid. Valentine's Day is Friday. I know, but I want you to do something stupid and forget about the event happening, and yeah, get your stuff on Friday so that you miss it on Thursday. What are we doing? So we'll go out to eat. We're gonna go out to eat on Thursday, and we're gonna do. Oh yes. Oh, and there's movie night. Don't forget about Crazy Rich Asians, which as a class we're gonna go to for my Thursday class. But we're all welcome to it too. It's on February 28th. Doors open at 4:30. There's 2 showings, 4:45 and 7.
Where?
C208, above the cafeteria. That big room.
It's at night though, right?
Yeah. Well, 4:45. There's 4:45 showing and 7. You have to work on Thursday.
I have work on Thursday.
Are you gonna miss the movie? Have you seen it? It's pretty good.
It's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty good. You should see it.
it was worth it, so.
I'll see. I'm making our class go see it, so it sounds pretty worth it.
It's
Do you think you're
but,
possibly
like,
exam next
I
week or the
definitely
week after?
saw it more as a
Probably the week after, unless you really want it.
I won't be.
Well, yeah, you're not gonna miss it.
I
We're just gonna
wanted to see it.
finish
I
these
tried to
slides,
get
so
to see
we'll
it,
just
but
have to
I
clean
didn't
up
want
and record.
Cool.
Yeah, and you'll be all good.
Have
Have fun.
All right.
No, well, I mean, I'll be here next week, but not the week after.
Do your family obligations, right? Yeah. Wait, what is that? What?
I'm just saying that to request off to watch the movie,
Oh, yeah, you should.
and then you're like, we have to request off 2 weeks in advance, and he says it's 2 weeks in advance still, and I was like, no.
You really should see the movie, though. It's a good movie. We're gonna do it. If you were taking contemporary, huh?
It's funny.
Ready?
I mean, I thought it was a little bit. So my wife called it a rom-com.
It's a
I thought it was
rom-com.
more rom than com. My wife thought it was equally rom and
I
com.
said the exact same.
Yeah,
thing.
I thought it was-
It's more rom than calm.
Yeah.
There's a couple spots that I felt like they could have added a little bit more calm.
Yeah.
Definitely overall, like going into it as thinking it's a rom